If you clicked on this video, chances are you're a Nintendo fan. Maybe you just fired up your Switch 2 today, whether it was Mario Kart, Donkey Kong Bonanza, or even something like Hollow Knight Silksong. But have you ever stopped to think about what inspired those games? Every new release, no matter how modern, owes something to the groundbreaking titles that came before it. Nintendo in particular has had a history of innovation, creating games that didn't just succeed, but actually changed the way we think about gaming altogether. Well, except Paper Mario Sticker Star. That one mostly changed how disappointed we could be. So today, I want to look back at some of the most innovative Nintendo games of all time, breaking down what made them special, why they mattered, and how they laid the foundation for the games we're still playing today. Donkey Kong. Before Mario was Mario, he was just Jumpman, and before Nintendo was a household name, they were a toy company trying to break into gaming. Donkey Kong is the game that changed that, and it did it with some clever design choices that most arcade titles hadn't dared try yet. First off, Donkey Kong gave players a multiple stage progression. In Pac-Man or Space Invaders, you're stuck in the same loop forever, just chasing a higher score. Donkey Kong gave you 4 different screens, each with unique layouts, hazards, and mechanics that gave the game a structure, a kind of sense that you were climbing towards something, both literally and figuratively. And then there's also the narrative. This was one of the first games to give us characters with personality. Donkey Kong wasn't just an obstacle, he was a villain. Or actually, you could say he wasn't a villain if you want to get into Nintendo lore, but moving on. Pauline wasn't just a random sprite, she was someone to rescue, and Jumpman, who we later know as Mario, was the hero. Suddenly, an arcade game had stakes and a story, even if it was pretty minimal. And then there's the most obvious innovation, the jump button. Before Donkey Kong, most games only let you move up, down, left, and right. Having the ability to jump completely changed the way designers thought about action games. Suddenly, platforming was possible, and that single mechanic would go on to define one of gaming's most important genres. Now, there were games where you could jump before, I'm sure, but this one had the most impact. Donkey Kong may look primitive today, but it's the game that set Nintendo on its path and gave the world the blueprint for the platformer. Now, if Donkey Kong was the opening act, Super Mario Bros. Was the main event. Released on the NES, it didn't just put Mario in the spotlight, it reinvented what a home console game can be. The magic of Super Mario Bros. Starts with World 1-1. That opening stage is still studied today because it teaches the player everything they need to know without a single tutorial message. You see a Goomba, you learn how to jump, you hit a question block, a mushroom pops out, you grab it, you get bigger. The game communicates entirely through design, not text, and that was genius. The side-scrolling movement was another leap forward. Instead of being stuck on one screen, the camera followed Mario across seamless flowing environments. It felt like you were really traveling through the Mushroom Kingdom, not just clearing rooms one by one. Then there are the power-ups. The Super Mushroom gave you a buffer, essentially a free hit, which made the game more approachable. The Fire Flower changed how you played entirely, letting you pick off enemies from a distance. These weren't just gimmicks, they gave players flexibility and some strategy in how they approached each challenge. And of course, the secrets. Warp zones, hidden one-ups, invisible blocks. Super Mario Bros. Encouraged players to experiment and explore in a genre that had usually been about just surviving. That curiosity kept people playing long after they'd seen the ending. Super Mario Bros. Didn't just shape platformers, it defined home console gaming. Its pacing, design, and structure became the gold standard that everything from Sonic the Hedgehog to Mega Man, and even Bubsy would chase after. Now, if Mario showed us how to run and jump, Zelda showed us how to explore. The original Legend of Zelda dropped players into a massive overworld with no real guidance. There were no arrows pointing the way, no pop-ups telling you what to do. You just walked out of that cave, grabbed your sword, and the world was yours to discover. This open-ended design was unheard of in 1986. You could stumble into dungeons out of order, bomb random walls to find secrets, or burn bushes to uncover hidden staircases. The game rewarded curiosity and made players feel like they were actually uncovering mysteries in a dangerous, unpredictable world. It also pioneered persistent progression. Thanks to battery saves, players could store their progress and come back later. That meant Zelda wasn't just a short arcade-style run, it was an epic adventure you could chip away at over weeks. For all of us born after this, we take for granted just being able to save a video game, because most games back then, you couldn't save. When you turned off the console, that was it, you had to restart. But I want to add in another game in this entry on the list, because while the original Zelda was very innovative, A Link to the Past refined everything. Its famous light and dark world mechanic doubled the game's complexity, actions in one world affected the other, and that forced players to think about puzzles and explorations in 2 layers. The dungeons were brilliantly designed around unique items like the hookshot and ice rod, and the game also deepened storytelling with richer NPCs and lore. It's like the original Zelda was just a sketch with a pencil, and then A Link to the Past colored everything in and added details. These games together are really why we have the action-adventure genre. Games like Secret of Mana, Skyrim, even Dark Souls trace their DNA back to Zelda in some way. Exploration, progression, puzzles, and freedom, it kinda all started here. If Zelda gave you a sprawling overworld, Metroid gave you a maze. Unlike most side-scrollers of its time, Metroid wasn't about moving left to right toward an ending. Instead, it dropped you into a massive interconnected map where progress wasn't obvious. The entire game was about exploration, but with a twist. The key innovation here was ability-based progression. You start as a vulnerable bounty hunter with limited tools, then you find the morph ball, which lets you roll into tight spaces. Later you pick up the missiles to blast open locked doors, or the ice beam to freeze enemies and turn them into platforms. Every upgrade didn't just make Samus stronger, it completely recontextualized the map. Places that looked like dead ends hours ago suddenly became new pathways. This design, backtracking with new abilities to unlock hidden areas, was revolutionary. It turned the world itself into a puzzle, and players had to think spatially, memorizing landmarks and re-examining familiar corridors with fresh eyes with the new abilities. Then came Super Metroid, which perfected the formula. The map was huge, atmospheric, and connected in ways that felt organic rather than staged. The eerie silence of abandoned corridors, the pulsing soundtrack, the sudden shock of Ridley's theme, it was cinematic in a way no other 2D game had achieved at the time. Mechanically, it introduced an in-game map system, making exploration much more manageable, and it refined Samus's controls so she felt smoother to control and more agile. The game's pacing was masterful, moments of tense isolation followed by bursts of empowerment as new upgrades opened whole regions. Super Metroid didn't just influence its own series, it helped create an entire genre, the Metroidvania as we know it, and games like Hollow Knight, Ori, and Dead Cells are still building on this today. We would have none of these games and so many more without Metroid. Now for the first handheld games on the list. When Pokemon Red and Blue launched, they weren't just games, they were a cultural shift. On the surface, they were simple RPGs, you explore towns, battle trainers, and fight your way through gyms, but the real hook was in the mechanics that made Pokemon unlike anything else. First, the collection system. Instead of controlling a single hero, you built teams of 6 Pokemon, each with their own stats, types, and movesets. Battles were turn-based and easy to learn, but deep enough to reward strategy. Suddenly, encounters weren't just about winning, they were about catching and expanding your collection. The genius move, though, was the link cable. Nintendo deliberately split the Pokédex between Red and Blue versions, which meant you couldn't catch them all without trading. For the first time, a single-player RPG encouraged real-world social interaction. You had to connect with other players to finish your Pokédex, making Pokemon as much about community as it was about gameplay. Then there was also Pokemon Yellow, which leaned into the same anime craze by letting Pikachu follow you around, blurred the lines between the show and the cards and the games, and created a multimedia empire unlike anything else. Pokemon wasn't just innovative from a game sense, it innovated the entire 90s, the 2000s, the 2010s, and even now its effects are still felt. Like, think about the craze of Pokemon Go back in 2016. It was 20 years after the original Pokemon. And even now, the games are still widely popular, and there's been movies, grown men rushing to the store when Pokemon cards drop to make sure that kids don't get any, and so much more. Mechanically, Pokemon laid the foundation for the monster collecting RPG. Everything from Digimon to Yokai Watch, and even mobile gacha games today borrow from its mix of collection, progression, and trading, and it proved that handheld consoles weren't just for quick bursts of fun, but they could host massive, sprawling adventures you could carry in your pocket. While Pokemon brought RPGs to the playground, Earthbound flipped the genre on its head entirely. Instead of swords and dragons, Earthbound gave you kids in suburban America fighting everything from cultists to hippies to sentient piles of puke. It was weird, funny, and heartfelt all at once. Mechanically, it stuck to a turn-based combat system, but with some clever twist. The rolling HP counter meant you could survive fatal hits if you healed fast enough, adding a layer of tension to every battle. Status effects weren't generic. Ness could literally get homesick and miss turns until he called his mom. These touches grounded the game in everyday life while still keeping it surreal. But what really set Earthbound apart was its tone and setting. You weren't slaying demons or saving a fantasy kingdom. You were buying burgers at the mall, taking out cash from ATMs, and fighting aliens in your backyard. It was kind of just a parody of RPGs, and it never lost its heart. And that's the thing. For all its satire, Earthbound had one of the most emotionally resonant stories of its time. It balanced humor with genuine moments of friendship, growth, and courage. That emotional core is why it became such a cult classic, inspiring games like Undertale, and of course its successor, Mother 3. While Earthbound never was that popular at launch, even though it had a dedicated community, 10 years ago Undertale released and became another phenomenon in the gaming industry. Undertale and Deltarune took heavy inspiration from the SNES adventure. In fact, it took so much inspiration that MatPat has made like 10 theories about how the lore of these games is connected, and that Sans from Undertale is actually Ness. If that doesn't show how innovative and influential Earthbound was, I don't know what else does. If Super Mario Bros. Defined 2D platformers, Super Mario 64 redefined what a platformer and really what a video game could be in 3D. Moving from sprites to polygons wasn't just a graphical upgrade, it meant completely rethinking how players would move, see, and interact in a new kind of virtual space. The biggest innovation was its control scheme. The N64 controller's analog stick gave Mario full 360-degree movement. Push it slightly and he tipped tiptoes, push harder any sprints, and with the press of a button, you can chain together wall kicks, triple jumps, and long jumps. For the first time, movement in a 3D world felt natural, fluid, and precise, which is why Mario 64 still feels good to play today. Then there's the camera system. At the time, no one had figured out how to handle a free camera in 3D. Nintendo's solution was genius. They turned it into a character. Lakitu literally followed Mario with a camera, and players could adjust the view with the C buttons. Sure, it wasn't perfect, and it has shown its age, but it set the standard for how 3D games would handle perspective going forward. But maybe the most brilliant part was the level design. Instead of just beating a stage and moving on, each world was an open-ended playground with multiple objectives, collecting stars by racing Koopa the Quick, flying through rings, or finding hidden secrets. You weren't just going from start to finish, you were choosing how to approach each world. That freedom made the game endlessly replayable. Super Mario 64 wasn't just another Mario game, it was a proof of concept for 3D gaming itself. Every 3D platformer that came after, whether it's Banjo-Kazooie, Spyro, Crash Bandicoot, even modern open-world adventures, owes its existence to the blueprint laid down here. If Mario 64 was a 3D leap for platformers, Ocarina of Time was the same leap for adventure games. It's not just considered one of the greatest games ever made, it's considered one of the most important because it solved problems nobody else had figured out yet, like what Mario 64 did. The most famous innovation was Z targeting. Fighting enemies in 3D is messy when you can't reliably face them. Nintendo solved this by letting players lock onto a target with a button press. Suddenly, combat became fluid, intuitive, and cinematic. That one mechanic became the foundation of 3D combat in games like Dark Souls, Devil May Cry, and so many others. Ocarina also pioneered context-sensitive controls. Instead of cluttering the controller with a million commands, one button would change depending on the situation. Opening doors, talking to NPCs, pushing blocks, or attacking. Streamlined gameplay, it made exploring a 3D world approachable at a time when developers were still experimenting. Then there was the time mechanic. Switching between young Link and adult Link wasn't just a gimmick, it changed how you interacted with the world. Some areas can only be accessed at specific ages, and puzzles required thinking about cause and effect across time. And in the Ocarina itself, with actual button inputs to play songs that changed the environment, and you had mechanics that felt fresh and interactive. The dungeons combined puzzles, exploration, and combat in ways that felt cinematic, and Hyrule Field gave players the sense of an open world long before open world was a buzzword. Ocarina of Time didn't just set the template for future Zelda games, it set the template for 3D action adventures as a whole. 10 years after Ocarina of Time, we got a game that was completely different, but still extremely innovative. By the time the Wii launched, motion controls weren't exactly a proven idea. Most people thought they'd be a gimmick, but with the Wii launch, we got Wii Sports and it changed everything. Its brilliance wasn't in complexity, but in accessibility. The Wii Remote let you swing a tennis racket, bowl a strike, or hit a baseball simply by mimicking the real-life motion. There were no combos to memorize, no complicated controls, just natural, intuitive gestures that anyone could pick up instantly. I remember when I first played this, it was around 2007, I was 4 years old. I was at a friend's house and they asked if I wanted to play a game called Wii Sports, and I had no idea what it was at the time. I was just handed the controller to play boxing, and within a minute, even though I was only 4 years old and had never played this game before, I was able to pick it up. And that's really where Wii Sports broke barriers. It wasn't just kids or gamers playing it, it was parents, grandparents, even people who never touched a console before. Suddenly, everyone could be part of the fun. It wasn't just a game, but it was a social experience. Families played it together, parties had it, even hospitals used it for physical therapy. The success of Wii Sports proved that innovation doesn't always mean making games more complex. Sometimes it means making them more approachable. It paved the way for motion gaming to take off with things like Kinect, PlayStation Move, and eventually VR. And while motion controls have come and gone in popularity, Wii Sports remains one of Nintendo's clearest examples of a simple idea that completely reshaped gaming. Now, this game is the complete opposite of Wii Sports, because where Wii Sports was very simple, this game could get pretty complicated. The original Smash Bros. On the Nintendo 64 was a fun little experiment, but Melee is where the series exploded, and it did so by redefining what a fighting game could be. Now, a lot of this is thanks to the N64 original, so I am going to touch on that first. The big twist was in its victory condition. Instead of draining a health bar, you racked up percentage damage. The higher that number climbed, the further opponents would fly when hit. Victory came not from grinding down HP, but from knocking your rival off the stage entirely. This made matches chaotic, unpredictable, and endlessly replayable. Melee built on that foundation with speed and depth. Movement was faster, combat was tighter, there were more combos, it was just way more advanced technically. Things like wave dashing, L canceling, directional influence, many of these weren't even intended by the developers, but competitive players mastered them, turning Melee into one of the most demanding, high-skill fighting games ever. At the same time, it did remain accessible. 4-player battles, items, and wild stage hazards meant that even casual players could pick it up and have fun, and that's the genius of Smash. It worked both as a party game and a competitive esport. Melee in particular struck that balance so perfectly that people are still playing it competitively more than 2 decades later. In short, Melee didn't just innovate, it inspired an entire platform fighter genre. Obviously it inspired the future Smash entries, but also games like Trials of Aether, Multiverses, Brawlhalla, PlayStation All-Stars, and yeah, none of these games have came close to replicating Smash. Racing games were nothing new by the mid-90s, but Mario Kart 64 changed the conversation by perfecting what a kart racer could be. The most obvious leap was the use of fully 3D track design. The original Mario Kart on SNES used Mode 7 graphics to fake a 3D perspective, but Mario Kart 64 delivered actual polygonal courses. That meant verticality, hills, ramps, bridges, and shortcuts that made every race feel dynamic. Then came the items. The NES game had them, sure, but Mario Kart 64 turned them into the chaotic balancing act we know today. Red shells homed in on opponents, lightning bolts shrank the competition, and the dreaded blue shell became every first place player's nightmare. Suddenly, victory wasn't just about raw driving skills, it was about surviving the chaos. And let's not forget about multiplayer. With N64's 4 controller ports, Mario Kart 64 became a staple of living rooms everywhere in the 90s. Now, I wasn't around then, but I played Mario Kart DS and Mario Kart Wii so much as a kid, and that's all thanks to really Super Mario Kart, but more importantly Mario Kart 64 for modernizing the series. And here's the thing, these games didn't just build a franchise, they established kart racing as its own genre. Nearly every party racer since Crash Team Racing, Sonic and All-Stars Racing, Garfield Kart, or whatever this game is called, they all trace the roots back to Mario Kart. And the most recent game on this list I want to talk about, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. After years of following a formula, Nintendo tore it all down and rebuilt Zelda from the ground up, and the result was one of the most influential open world games ever made. The brilliance of Breath of the Wild lies in its system-driven design. Instead of guiding players through a strict sequence of dungeons and items, the game dropped you into Hyrule with nothing, and just said go. You can climb any mountain, glide across valleys, tackle enemies in any order. It was true freedom like the original Zelda. The mechanics reinforced that freedom. Weapons broke, forcing you to improvise, fire spread through grass, metal conducted electricity, bombs launched objects with physics-based solutions. The game never told you how to solve a puzzle, it simply gave you tools and let you experiment. Shrines for the most part replaced traditional dungeons, because while there were dungeons in this game, that is a big flaw in my opinion. And the overworld itself became the greatest puzzle of all, filled with secrets hidden on mountaintops and valleys under rocks. Exploration wasn't a side activity, but it was the complete point of the game. Breath of the Wild didn't just reinvent Zelda, but it kind of reinvented the open world genre that at the time was starting to feel a little stale, where every single game had to be open world. The extremely popular Elden Ring pretty obviously took some inspiration from this game, and of course Tears of the Kingdom, which was this game's sequel. Now, I personally prefer Tears of the Kingdom. I think it took what Breath of the Wild did and just made it better, but Breath of the Wild is the far more innovative game. From Donkey Kong's jump button to Mario 64's analog controls to Breath of the Wild's open world systems, Nintendo has never been afraid to take risks, and time after time those risks have reshaped gaming itself. These games weren't just hits, but they were turning points and changed how we play and how we think about games. There's so many innovative games Nintendo has made, so obviously I can't include every single one, but let me know in the comments what you think the most innovative Nintendo games are, and if you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe and like, and also consider joining my Discord and becoming a channel member for just a couple bucks a month. Thank you for watching Domainy, and I'll see you next time.